I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 300 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. And today I'm talking about what podcasting has taught me about life. So, my friends, today marks the 300th time that I have sat myself in front of a microphone and pressed record for this podcast. And I can't even believe that. For episode 100, I was looking back through our archives. I did an episode about honoring milestones, and that would certainly still apply today. And for episode 200, I did an episode where I answered listener questions. And I loved that one because you all were so generous with the questions that you sent in. And it is just always fun to know that the responses that I have are going to land with a ready audience because the questions were sourced from you. And today, what I thought I would do is share a few lessons that podcasting as an art form has taught me about life. And there really are probably way more than three. If I give myself permission to think about it for a long time, it is a bit of one of those places where art is kind of imitating life. And in the way that you might feel about your journals or a writer might feel about books that they've published over a period of time. You know, I think anyone who's doing creative work, there is this sense of the work kind of growing up with you. And not only is the content of the work growing up with me or growing alongside me, but also the lessons that just the practice of sitting behind this microphone and recording the episodes week after week, that process itself has revealed some lessons that I think are true about life that I find myself reflecting on at this milestone. So for episode 300, that's what I want to do is just get into these three lessons. And I'm sure there are other pursuits and practices that could teach the same kinds of lessons that you might be engaged in, that if you give it a few moments of thought, you might realize what you're getting from, for example, a daily running practice or gardening, right? Or pickleball, if you've picked up on that craze these days, or maybe you play piano or another instrument. Like there's something about these things that we do over and over again that there are really beautiful lessons embedded within them. So the first lesson that I think podcasting has taught me about life or reinforced is you can't finish what you don't start. And I remember back when I was pondering, should I or should I not start a podcast? And it felt like there were already a lot of them in the universe. And since then, of course, there have been many, many, many more players enter this space. But I had this sense that it was never going to feel like the perfect time. There wasn't ever going to feel like I knew exactly what I wanted it to be or exactly what I wanted to say. But I did have a very clear prompting or calling or gravitational pull toward the idea of this medium, And so it was clear that if I didn't start at some point, I was never going to have a podcast. And I was going to be sitting on the sidelines where other people had theirs that were growing audiences and crafting messages, and that I wasn't going to be a part of that. So the lesson now, 300 episodes later, is that there may never be a finish line. I don't have a finish line in sight for the podcast. It's essentially an infinite game, right? This is something that I'll continue to do as long as you find value in it as listeners and as long as I find value in it as a way to process lessons that I'm learning and things that I'm thinking about. But you definitely can't finish things that you don't start. And so there is so much power in just beginning, even if that means starting very small. It's about finding the first step and taking those first imperfect actions in the direction of the dream. And there are, sadly, very sadly, other places in my life where I have not yet applied that lesson, where there are things that I haven't even started that I would like to do. And you may have some of those in your life. But I do have 300 episodes of a podcast. And that is something that as I sit here today, it's like I almost am not sure how we got here. How did I possibly do 300? Which brings me to the second lesson that podcasting has taught me about life, and that is that accountability creates consistency. Accountability creates consistency. There are few things over those last 5 years or so that I have done with as much consistency as I have podcasted. This has been an every week, no matter what, we are getting an episode out. And even if it's a reprise episode, an episode where I'm re-airing previous content, there has always been at a minimum a new introduction or conclusion to that episode that explains why and brings some relevance to that chapter. So the consistency of sitting down to do this every single week without fail, I think is really underpinned by a sense of accountability. And in this case, there are accountability in various ways. One is, my accountability to my team. My team made a commitment to doing this podcast way back when we started. And we have a process that's crosshatched among several people who are involved. And so there are prompts to help make sure that topics have been selected and that guests have been booked and that we have show notes being produced and we know the sequence of things, right? So there is a process that my team has developed. And so I am accountable to them, or we are accountable to each other. Secondly, we pay a producer and a sound engineer, like a team of people to take my raw audio content and produce it into the podcast that you hear, right? And to put it together with the show notes and get it published on all of the many places that people can listen to the show. So they are waiting on the other side for the audio file to land so that they can do their work and get it out into the podcast universe. Hi, it's Cheryl Ann. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the ideas I share on this show are things I also can help you implement? If you want me in your corner helping you find more time for what fills you up, go to brilliant-balance.com/schedule and sign up for a free exploratory call. Give yourself this time. You'll be so glad you did. And then I vividly remember the first Tuesday that a listener got in touch with my team to say, hey, it's Tuesday and I can't find the podcast. Did something happen? And I was so delighted by that. It was not very long into the podcasting experience. And you're the point where you're kind of wondering, like, is anyone even aware that this comes out on Tuesdays? Is anybody really listening for this? And it was clear that at least that one person was aware that, hey, it's Tuesday and I don't see my podcast. And we were having a technical difficulty that week with getting it to replicate across the various sites where the podcast is findable. And so internally, I was like, oh, there it is. There's the reminder that there's an external audience, at least one listener who represents the many, many thousands of you who listen to the show, that was another form of accountability, that you were counting on your Tuesdays having an episode available to you. And that was a very clear decision when we started the show. And I was talking with the production team that we work with, as well as my own team. We picked Tuesday as the day we were going to release the podcast because so many of my listeners we expected to be women who work outside the home. And we thought Mondays are really pretty overwhelming. Like Monday, you have a lot on your mind going back into the work week. And Tuesday might be the day that you're ready for that little, you can kind of settle in and listen to something that might require some concentration or some thought. And then you'd have it with you throughout the week as you went about your week. And so we picked Tuesday with purpose, and we've stuck with Tuesdays because knowing that consistency of that day of the week every week, both for us and for you, would help create that drumbeat. So the accountability to other people, someone other than myself, of knowing this is not just a process by which, I'm doing a yoga practice or I am journaling or I am doing something that no one else will see. That accountability really, I know for sure, is something that created consistency in this practice. And I think that's a lesson that's extractable to other areas of life where I might be struggling more with consistency. Asking myself, how can I create some external accountability? How can I get some other eyes on this process so that I feel more compelled to do it? And the third lesson that has been really poignant about podcasting is to follow the flow. I've been so surprised by where it leads when I just follow the flow. Where is there energy? Where do I feel excited? What is capturing my imagination or my attention? What am I thinking about? And following that kind of energetic flow is often what prompts me to, craft a particular episode or choose a particular topic. And I sort of have a process for asking for a little bit of guidance on what would be the next best topic, right? There have been a couple of times I've asked you directly, what would you like to hear episodes on? There have been times I've asked our client community, the women that I'm already in a two-way dialogue with, what are some topics? And often during coaching calls, I will hear topics that are tripping them up, right? Topics that are keeping them stuck or where they're struggling. And I think, this is a good thing to dig into on the podcast because I know there's more people who will benefit. But sometimes it's just a nudge. It's just a prompting. I remember one in particular called Let Yourself Come Up for Air. And I wasn't sure, is this podcast going to even resonate? Is this a topic anyone cares about? And those are sometimes the most powerful because I'll publish the episode and then it takes a few weeks before it hits the airwaves. And then I'll get a note or an email back to the weekly when we release it, or a review, or someone will DM me on social media saying, oh my goodness, that episode hit at just the right moment. It was such a gift to me. It was such a blessing to me. I really needed to hear those words at that time. And man, there is nothing like that. It's like watching an arrow land, or a ship like find its way to a lighthouse. There's this matching between the prompt that said, hey, talk about this, right? Get into this area, give this nudge. And then someone on the receiving end saying, that's what I needed. That match is the magic to me. And that comes most regularly when I just let myself follow the flow, right? When there's not too much of a strategy or a rigor or a long range plan around the topical emphasis of the podcast, right? If I just let it have a little bit of flow to what's current, what's running through my mind, those are consistently the episodes that seem to land. And it makes me think of this quote by Frederick Buechner. And he is the one who said that calling is where our greatest gladness meets the world's greatest need. And I think he was onto something where our greatest gladness meets the world's greatest need, right? I think my internalization of that is when I am doing the thing that feels right to me, that has flow, that's using my gifts, that's given joyfully and generously. And when that's matched up with a recipient, one recipient or many who really need that thing that I have to offer, that's where we are fulfilling a calling. And that is exactly what I feel like about the podcast, that there is just no greater pleasure in the many, many things that I get to do. Podcasting has become one of my favorites. And it's because of the response, because whenever I hear that the way that I described something or the framework that I put around something was helpful in getting you unstuck or creating a sense of relief or making you feel that you're not alone, it's just magic. It's just magic. So today, as I publish episode 300, I would just ask, if you are getting something out of the show, please know that it is such a delight to me when I am aware of that. And if you feel so inclined to send me a note or write a review in any of the podcast publishing services, or share the show with someone that you'd like to gift 300 episodes that they can listen to at their leisure, just waiting for them. They can scroll around to their heart's content. They can go to our website, brilliant-balance.com/podcast. At that page, there is a podcast prescription tool where you can type in a couple of keywords about what's the topic that you need some support with, and it will return results to you that are in that arena, right? That are about that subject matter in some way, shape, or form. So if you need a podcast prescription from the archives, that's a great place to go. And just know that it is so heartwarming to me to hear how the show has touched your life. I am so very glad to be in your corner. Till next time, my friends, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.